Good evening and welcome to Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre Live. Tonight I'm very pleased to welcome Olivia Marks-Woldman, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. So Olivia, thank you very much for joining us. I know you became Chief Executive in February 2012, and since then you've overseen the growth of Holocaust Memorial Day around the country and a hugely increased media presence. This is a great opportunity for us to find out more about the organisation and all the work that you do. So I know that Holocaust Memorial Day isn't just one day, or the Trust doesn't just focus on one day. There's lots more to find out. But first of all, I thought it would be interesting to just find out a little bit about you and your background. Did you always want to work with charities? How did that all begin?
Firstly, can I just say thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be with you all, and it's lovely to see some familiar faces on the call as well. Nice to be back. I was about to say nice to be back in Scotland, but even if it's only virtually. So did I always want to work in charities? I initially wanted to have a career doing something that I thought was worthwhile. And obviously that's hugely broad. And when you're young, oh my goodness, you know, what counts as worthwhile? It's so, it was very vague. And I worked for a member of Parliament. I worked for a member of the Scottish Parliament. And then I started working for charities. And every time it came to move on, and I thought maybe it'd be quite healthy to move out of the voluntary sector and get some experience elsewhere, all the jobs that came up that were interesting and challenging I found were in the voluntary sector. So I've always, apart from those two times when I've been in the political sphere, I've always worked for different charities and just been very lucky to find jobs that I've enjoyed, that have been with engaging, bright, interesting, committed people, and doing something that I do think is really worthwhile.
Thank you. And working in the political sphere, do you think that has helped your work in the charitable sector?
Well, the charity sector is so vast. I spent some of my early career working at Scope, which used to be the Spastic Society. You know, it was at the time, and this was about 30 years ago, it was a £70 million enterprise. You know, it was running schools, it was running services, it was in, you know, huge organization. And the role that I was doing was very much about political campaigning and supporting disabled people to become campaigners themselves, to become advocates for themselves. So I was doing a lot of training with them, as well as then helping run political campaigns with disabled people very much at the centre of that. So the political work I had done was definitely very useful, but some of the academic work I had done at university about disability was also very useful for that role. Particularly, all the roles I've done have been about achieving change, whether through political work. At Scope, I was very involved in lobbying for what then became the Disability Discrimination Act, and through policy. So when I was working with Epilepsy Scotland, we were looking a lot at health policy and how could health boards develop policies that would support people with epilepsy in a more effective way. So a lot of the work we were doing was around the research and building a case, and then working with health boards to develop their policies. So it's around that side of things that I've had my experience, and all of which has really helped with the work I do now, which is more about raising awareness and engaging huge numbers of people in marking Holocaust Memorial Day.
But always building partnerships and working with different organisations. So Holocaust Memorial Day Trust has an obvious focus on that one particular day in January, Holocaust Memorial Day. But of course, you don't just work on that day, and you don't just work for that day. So can you tell us a bit more about the trust and the scope of the trust is, and what it does, as well as the Memorial Day?
When I started, somebody, an academic, said to me, "You'll discover that Holocaust Memorial Day is not just about the Holocaust. It's not just about memorial, and it doesn't just last one day. But apart from that, it's a great name. And very quickly, I realized that he was right. In the UK, Holocaust Memorial Day obviously has the Holocaust at the center of the day. It has primacy in the day. But we also commemorate non-Jewish victims of Nazi persecution. We commemorate genocides that have happened since the Holocaust. And we don't just memorialize, we also learn. That commemoration is really about that commemoration of the past, but it's also about learning what happened. So it's not just a sort of superficial commemoration, it's really about learning about the past, that historical accuracy. And then it is also about taking action in the communities that are marking Holocaust Memorial Day. And in fact, those activities for Holocaust Memorial Day last almost a month now. It's a good 3 weeks, couple of weeks leading up to Holocaust Memorial Day, at least a week afterwards. And then through the rest of the year, we're encouraging people to plan their next year's HMD. We're developing a theme. We're marking the anniversaries that relate to recent genocides. We're doing so much to build on it because we know it has an impact. That impact lasts through the year. So we work with partner organisations to make sure that people who mark Holocaust Memorial Day really can take action as a result of what they're learning. So for some people, it might be encouraging them to go and learn more. Hopefully it leads to people to go and learn more at the Scottish Archives Centre, go and be in touch with vision schools in Scotland. Across the rest of the UK, it might mean a trip to the National Holocaust Centre in Newark, used to be called Beth Shalom. It might mean a trip to the Imperial War Museum. There's so many opportunities that people can do that they're inspired to do because of what they've done on Holocaust Memorial Day.
And have you found that over the 10 years, it's become easier to get people involved?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. On the one hand, yes, because I think people who come to an HMD activity almost always want to repeat it the following year and to make it bigger or to bring in different audiences. So working with them, we can kind of expand the reach. But for others, it's much harder work for people who haven't marked Holocaust Memorial Day and haven't been touched by it at all, to encourage them to see the benefit of marking it. So some of my team would be, for example, approaching a museum and saying, well, have you got any artifacts that actually might touch on some of this history? Or if you do an event in partnership with somebody else, would it help you bring in a new audience to your museum? We're very lucky we've got Kirsty Robson on this call. She's been working with us alongside her role at Skojec to work with local groups across Scotland. So pick her brains afterwards as well. With some people, it's knocking at an open door and they really want to mark it. For others, it's more of a conversation about persuading them to get involved. And I see Joe Goldblatt on the call as well. There's a huge constituency of faith and interfaith organisations who mark HMD. And for some of those faith communities, it's part of their history, whether that's the Jewish community or there are many connections with some of the Christian communities. For other faiths, it's not necessarily known in their community, and it's more of a conversation and building a relationship to say, whether or not this is part of our history, it has meaning for all of us, and we all need to learn about the Holocaust. We all need to learn where prejudice against Jewish people has ultimately led when it hasn't been challenged. And we need to understand that prejudice hasn't disappeared. So that's a bit of a convoluted answer to the question, David.
No, it's good answer. It gives a good idea of that kind of outreach work that you're doing. I know from looking at your website, you have resources for schools. Can you just talk about that and how you managed to get schools involved in Holocaust Memorial Day?
So the people who mark HMD, young people is obviously very, very important. So young people in formal education environments mark HMD in a massive variety of ways. So we will provide assemblies, tutor time activities, dedicated lessons that teachers can download and use. And there's a real range. Some schools, for example, the vision schools, who are already having teachers who are hugely engaged with the topic of Holocaust education, have had more training. They might not need any of our resources. They might take our theme and they've got their own creative work to do that they're really up for doing. Others will just think, help, I want to do an assembly, what can I do? And they'll just download our assembly and it's all there. But we also work with young people in informal education settings, you know, in youth clubs and in student societies on campus or in FE colleges. And I could talk about adults separately, but that's some of the work that we do with young people. It just ranges a lot, and the resources we produce are for different age groups, and also we do a lot of specialist resources for kids with special needs, which is something I feel particularly strongly about, although the organisation was doing that anyway before I joined. But we really try and make sure that Holocaust Memorial Day is accessible for everybody. Anybody can take part in Holocaust Memorial Day, and it's really important that everybody does and that nobody feels excluded from it. So when we create resources, we tailor them for different ages. So our resources for primary schools and for younger kids, for the older junior school kids, we'll do resources that will be very germane to the Holocaust. It'll be around, usually around histories relating to the kinder transport. So it's young people who've come here. Henry Wooger has been very involved in some of the resources and in the Scotland ceremony. But even younger children will do resources that are more about the issues at stake, about treating people with respect, not leaving people out, so that there's something there that can be built on in the school when they come back to Holocaust Memorial Day each year as they grow older. They've got a foundation in what the kind of principles are about without being too horrifying and distressing.
Right. And I mean, do you come across schools that don't teach anything about the Holocaust, or in fact the children or students just don't know anything about it and don't understand why it's of relevance?
Last year, our records showed that about a quarter of secondary schools across the United Kingdom marked Holocaust Memorial Day. Now, there well might be other schools that marked it that we don't know about, but even so, that still shows the kind of scale of what we need to do to reach every school. We were I think our numbers were low last year because of COVID. I think at the time of HMD, the Scottish schools certainly were in another wave of lockdown. So that's definitely impacted. But yeah, I think there will always be schools who think, oh, I'm too busy, haven't got time, we haven't got space in the curriculum, we haven't got space in our tutor times. And that's a lot of our work to try and persuade them that there's a real benefit to their school community to be marking Holocaust Memorial Day, and it's a really important topic. And that's part of the scale of what our job is, to keep encouraging more and more schools to mark it. And we work collaboratively with organisations like Vision Schools in Scotland, the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education in England, and sister organisations such as the Anne Frank Trust and the Holocaust Educational Trust, and so on.
So I suppose it can tie in with many parts of the curriculum, can't it? You know, not just history, but other subject areas as well.
Yes, it's taught in drama, in politics, in history, in English, in RE, and in PSHE, or I keep changing the name, but in civil society lessons. Yeah, a lot of it depends on the enthusiasm of the teacher to kind of run with it. And there are some amazing champions across Scotland and across the UK as a whole.
What about with older people, with adults? Is it more difficult to break through there? And
I feel like I'm running a one-woman campaign to sort of like hear it for the middle-aged. I think it's so important that adults mark Holocaust Memorial Day. It's kind of very obviously important for young people too, because it's very trite to say they are the future. They need to grow up understanding this history and knowing about this history. But they need to see the adults around them take it seriously. They need to have adults role modeling how important Holocaust Memorial Day is for the nation. And also, we know that young people will be running the country in a decade or two, but middle-aged people and older people are running it now. They need to be running the country and their organizations and their communities in ways that are respectful and tolerant and that challenge prejudice and that really understand some of those lessons from the Holocaust. So we work just as hard with adult audiences as with young audiences. And again, some places really understand why it's important to mark Holocaust Memorial Day and do some amazing activities within their audiences. I mean, just as an example, I think it might have been Leith Police Force a few years ago was sort of persuaded to do a Holocaust Memorial Day, and we facilitated to have for a survivor to come and talk at the Holocaust Memorial Day event. I think I'm getting muddled. I don't think it was Leith. Leith did something else. But with this police force, they had a survivor. They had no idea that within the community they serve, they had a Holocaust survivor. And it really made them think that their real driving force is to serve their community, keep their community safe and to serve their community. And they thought, well, we didn't even know that our community included a Holocaust survivor. Who else is in our community who we don't know about? And they set up a whole program of speakers once a month, having a different person from within their community come and speak to them and to give them different insights into their community. So they very quickly understood the benefit of what Holocaust Memorial Day had sparked with them. And then it meant that we could then go to other police forces and to try and share that good idea and to expand it. So a lot of the work of my team is trying to encourage different groups of adult audiences to mark Holocaust Memorial Day and make it relevant to them and their work. And I mean, yeah, as you said, David, in your very kind introduction, the Holocaust Memorial Day has just grown and grown and grown. And that's because I think people, well, one of the reasons is I think people want to engage with it because they think it's important and important for the people that they work with, whether it's their colleagues or whether it's the people who come into the bookshop or who use the library.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point about people not realizing that in their own community there would have been people affected by the Holocaust or in some way by the Second World War, you know, whether it was the Kinder transport just before the war or even, you know, during the war, refugees coming to the country. And of course you mentioned Leith. Well, all the ports were where traditionally people came in, you know, Dundee, Leith, Hull, Liverpool, I suppose, and London as well. So that's really, really interesting. I mean, just talking about profile, you know, you have an involvement from the late Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, who was your patron, or and so that was marvelous. And now the King Charles is also involved in. So you have, you know, members of the royal family, you have politicians, you have celebrities as well. Is that a more recent thing that more and more people that are quite high profile have come on board?
The Queen was our founder patron. The government set us up and asked the Queen to be the patron, and she agreed. And in 2015, which was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, it was a period when she was divesting herself of a number of her patronages. So we asked the then Prince of Wales to become our patron, and he agreed. And I think this is enormously significant, because it shows at the very, very highest level that the royal family believe it's important to commemorate the Holocaust and to learn about the Holocaust and to assert that it was true, and the historical accuracy of what happened needs to be learned and understood. And at a time of Holocaust denial, and maybe even more worryingly, Holocaust distortion, to have His Majesty the King say, you know, I've been your patron as Prince of Wales, I've commissioned portraits of Holocaust survivors, I'm giving OBEs or MBEs or BEMs, as Her Majesty the Queen did, to people who share their testimony so that other people can learn, I think is symbolically hugely important, and really helps us in our message that this needs to be understood. That historical record needs to be safeguarded against people who would distort it, and it needs to be shared. So people who come to Holocaust Memorial Day, there's a real, almost like a moral imperative to share what you have learned and go on and learn more. When I said earlier that people go on to take action, that's not just a kind of trite thing. It's a real imperative that people need to learn about this and then go on to take some form of action. Celebrities, we were really lucky. Dame Joanna Lumley supported us this year, and we've had celebrities do readings at the ceremony, and that's partly helps us reach a wider audience, so people who might not know anything about the Holocaust or genocide and might think, well, that's not really for me, but actually I loved Rob Rinder on Strictly, and if he's going to be part of this, I'm going to watch it. Or, you know, Dame Joanna, she's my favourite. That's really interesting what she's doing. It helps us reach a different audience, and it also helps enable people see that it's actually for everybody, you know, whatever age and whatever background. If Adrian Lester's doing a reading, which he did this year, or Rhys Stevenson, who's a young broadcaster, I'm hoping that it just shows that it's more accessible and it is a day for everybody.
I think one of the things that's always been important to me is to see the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust as individuals, rather than just a number, a statistic. And the portrait project, which started by now King Charles, I think was very impressive for that, because you had wide coverage on the news, in the media, not just of the amazing portraits. I don't know, maybe you could just explain that project, how it came about, for anyone that doesn't know.
It was an amazing project, and it was initiated by King Charles when he was Prince of Wales. His team approached us and said, Prince Charles, as he then was, has had this idea, can you help us make it happen? And he wanted to commission established artists, high caliber artists, to paint the portraits of Holocaust survivors. He absolutely got what you were saying, David, that a portrait, a face, the eyes is enormously significant. And he wanted to commission artists to paint portraits of Holocaust survivors. And we facilitated for a number of different survivors to be part of this project. And he matched survivors with artists. The BBC followed the progress of this. Bit of a nightmare to organise, because a few months into the start of this project, COVID hit. So it was just logistically much more complicated, and it delayed the project. it had initially been a project to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz in 2020, but it was delayed. But these portraits have been completed. The BBC broadcast a film about the creation of these portraits, and the portraits were then displayed in the Queen's Gallery in Buckingham Palace. Then they came up to Edinburgh and were on public display then. On both occasions, the exhibitions were sold out. It really reached an enormously wide audience, and it was just a really beautiful project. I mean, it really was very poignant for me, because when we had initially started discussing with him and thinking through how many portraits could the project encompass, by the time that it had developed and he had identified artists, one or two of the survivors we had thought of approaching had passed away. And since the portraits have been launched and on public display, one of the survivors who was in that exhibition has himself now passed away. And it just brings, I mean, we don't really need it to bring home to us the urgency of what we're doing, but it was just a very stark reminder of how precious survivors are and how precious these portraits are.
Well, we've had, a lot about the work that you do, and there seems to be lots of organisation, lots of projects, and quite complex things to arrange and keep hold of. Many things. You're doing many things at once. Do you have a big team? Is there a core team? Are there volunteers? How does that all work?
So we have a core team of 16 people who are our staff. I feel that's not very many, and we punch above our weight in that pre-pandemic there were 20,000 different activities across the country, and the UK ceremony had around 2,500 people at it in 2020. So that was pre-pandemic, and that was the 75th anniversary. And we're now building back up from the pandemic. If we're able to get extra funding, which in the last couple of years we've had funding from the Scottish Government, as well as the Welsh and the Northern Ireland administrations, we've been able to bring on board part-time freelance support workers. I give you Kirsty Robson. So that's been brilliant to be able to do that. So that's our team, and through the year we are working to develop the theme for the following year, and to be working with local organisations and encouraging them to mark the day. We're creating resources for them, we're working with survivors and supporting sister organisations who mark HMD too. So there's a lot going on all through the year, as well as unexpected projects like the Portraits project that the then Prince of Wales initiated. So there's a lot going on. I'm part of the UK delegation to IRA, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So there's work to do there with international partners and to share some of the good practice from the UK with other countries. I'm in a very privileged position to have the very surreal experience of receiving a phone call from Holland to say, how do you get to 20,000 events around the country for Holocaust Memorial Day? Can you teach Holland what to do? And we hosted a delegation from Australia a few years ago before the pandemic, because UK really does lead the way in a lot of this work.
I mean, let's just focus on you, Olivia, because you're at the centre of this, you're leading this. There's so many things to organise, and especially that one day. How do you stay calm? How do you
I probably
manage?
don't. There's a lot of shouting in my house.
Okay.
On a personal level, I absolutely couldn't do this without Simon, my husband, who some of you will know, who is immensely supportive in a very practical way. I know lots of families where the husband's sort of quite I don't know, sort of passively supporting. Simon is hugely active in sort of pushing me and supporting me. And I also couldn't do it without a nanny who's been amazing with our family. I should say, for people who don't know, I do have 3 children, one of whom has learning disabilities. But yeah, my kids are pretty good and they're getting older. So that's all on a sort of personal level. I couldn't do it without the team I work with and without the trustee board. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, I think, I know I'm biased, but we are an amazing organisation. Our trustees are hugely expert. They're really like top-notch people, but they're very, very supportive. They're not just sort of off in their own expert cloud 9. They really bring their expertise to support the work that we do. And oh my goodness, Kirsty can vouch for what an amazing staff team we have. They are awesome. They're a group of people who I'm really proud to lead, but really make it a great organisation to be part of. So I guess that's kind of the answer, really. Does that help? And a bit of shouting.
Well, I know we had a pre-meet to talk about what we were going to talk about, really, and this was something that came up. And you know, the first thing that you said to me was, I have a great team around me, and then talked about your family and that support and the trustees' support as well. And I think that's really interesting, you know, that there is that structure and that all these people around are supportive and playing their part, and at the centre it does take you know, a good leader. I'm not sure I believe all this about the shouting, but and that is something that again we really need in society, in government, and in organisations, good leaders. So would you say that your whole career up until now has really built your skills
Totally.
to do this? And is there any particular skill that you think is really important for?
I don't know, my career definitely has. Every job I've done has been really helpful in building my skills and in giving me different perspectives and different insights. But I'd say also not just the paid career. I've done volunteering activities along the way that have also been immensely enabling and have really helped me. You know, you always sort of think of volunteering as helping somebody else or helping another organisation, but boy, have those activities helped me as well. I just want to add one thing going back to being under stress, because I did have one crunch point, which was just before Holocaust Memorial Day 2015, which was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It was the first really big one I'd done. And we knew that we were going to have the Prince of Wales, Her Royal Highness Camilla, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Chief Rabbi, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition. And this was 6 weeks after my oldest child's bat mitzvah. And many of you on this call will know how difficult it is to organise and plan a bat mitzvah. And this was the first one. So I didn't have a list of, oh, I'll just go back to that caterer. And at one point I did think, I'm going to end up with a coachload of our guests pitching up at the venue for Holocaust Memorial Day and a coachload of survivors turning up for a ceilidh for my daughter, because I was just trying to keep a handle on so many things. And I did go to the head of delegation to IRA and say, any chance, Sir Andrew, you could move the date of Holocaust Memorial Day for me on this one occasion? It's the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. He couldn't move it for me. I just had to work my way through it.
And you
but
got
that was probably my most stressful moment.
Yeah. Has there been any other very stressful times?
Too many for this. I think you told me that we'd only got 45 minutes, so there are too many stressful moments.
Okay, well, I'll just move on to something that's maybe a wee bit more difficult, and we touched on this when we met. There is sometimes controversy about Holocaust Memorial Day. Some people saying, well, you know, the focus should really be on the Holocaust, but now you're mentioning other genocides, other troubles, and how do you deal with that? How do you answer that?
There are a lot of, I was surprised, maybe I was a bit naive, I was surprised at how many deeply controversial issues there are related to Holocaust Memorial Day. And you've pinpointed one of the ones I do get kind of lobbied about most often.
Recently, someone else publicly asked this question of, is the focus being diffused from the Holocaust? And I mean, for some people, it's very clear why other genocides it should be included, because part of this story of the Holocaust is it should never happen again.
Yeah, it's that I can really understand the concern about this, and part of our challenge is to get that balance right. The Holocaust has to have primacy within Holocaust Memorial Day, but the reasons we commemorate recent genocides as well are so important to what we learn about the Holocaust. The first thing I think anybody learns about the Holocaust is that you come out of that, whatever that learning is, a film, a lecture, a school lesson, and you say never again, because it's just so unimaginably horrific. But never again is a nonsense, because the parallels, the processes that led to the Holocaust have happened in other genocides. Now, the Holocaust is unique for many reasons, but the processes that led to it are not unique. The processes of identifying a group because of their faith or some other commonality, their sexuality, their ethnicity, their tribe, and then taking that group and othering them, putting a symbol on them. Muslim men in Bosnia had to wear white armbands. Intellectuals in Cambodia had to wear blue scarves, and then physically separating them, taking them out of the workplace, out of schools in Germany, but also taking intellectuals out of cities and taking them to killing fields. Those processes have happened. The use of propaganda as a tool to demonize an identifiable section of the citizenship, and then making laws, making these practices legal. Those processes have happened again. So if people say never again after learning about the Holocaust, there is necessarily a process of education to say, well, actually, some of these things have happened again. People also thought that anti-Semitism would die once people knew about the horrors of the Holocaust. That hasn't happened. It's on the increase in many places. So there are a number of reasons why we need to mark other genocides and show that prejudice based on faith or ethnicity or other issues such as pertaining to someone's identity, like their disability, those prejudices still exist today and have to be challenged. So all these things are part of Holocaust Memorial Day, and the challenge that we have is to make sure that we're maintaining that balance, to keep the Holocaust dominant within Holocaust Memorial Day, but also to make sure that people can commemorate other genocides appropriately. So yes, it is difficult to achieve that. I think on balance we do a pretty good job, but it's something that's very alive. We can't ever take that balance for granted and just assume that we'll be able to do it next year. We always check in with ourselves that we're getting that balance right.
I suppose it's, one of the challenges is breaking it down and saying, well, what are the elements that work together to cause the Holocaust? What are the stepping stones? And you've talked about demonization, propaganda, disinformation, and we can see that in a lot of areas and a lot of other troubles, these elements are present. But even in people's day-to-day lives, whether the workplace or school, these things in very small ways or big ways happen. And I suppose that's part of the discussion and the message that you're trying to get across?
Yes, we talk about the 10 stages that lead to genocide, the 10 stages of genocide. And this is a sort of academic model that Professor Gregory Stanton has developed. And they're not sort of linear. They include the things that I've talked about propaganda, about othering, about use of symbols, about separation, polarization, and so on. Lots of these stages can happen simultaneously, but also they're not inevitable. Once you start on that path, it's not inevitable that you'll end up with a genocide. Prejudice and othering people and use of propaganda doesn't always lead to a genocide, but pretty much every genocide has started with some of these processes. So we do try and tell people a lot about these, and a lot of the people we talk to are very surprised that mass murder and attempted annihilation of a community isn't the 10th stage of genocide, of these stages that Gregory Stanton has identified. The 10th and the final stage is denial, and that's something that can carry on for a long time, even after liberation, what we would see as the end of a genocide. That denial or that distortion of that history can continue for a long time, as many of us will be aware when we see anti-Semitism that manifests itself as Holocaust distortion.
And I guess the further that we get away from the Holocaust, the potency of denial becomes stronger. It has a stronger effect, doesn't it? Because there'll be less people that were there, less survivors. So it's keeping that flame alive, isn't it?
It is. And also one of the challenges that we're coming across increasingly is people, yes, there are people who'll say it didn't really happen, or it didn't happen in that way, or the numbers weren't like that, or it happened over there, but not here in Poland, or not here, it was all those Nazis in Germany, it didn't really happen in Latvia. So there's that distortion. But also what we're coming across more is people who'll say, yeah, it might have happened, but who cares? It was a long time ago, it's a different people, those Jews, they're all money grabbing, and they'll be going back into those tropes and back into those conspiracy theories. And it'll be based on a kind of, well, who cares about it? And we're also seeing online people who will be doing that sort of who cares approach much more deliberately as a way of offending and antagonizing people. So everything that we're doing is not only about trying to educate about the historical accuracy of what happened and that knowledge of the facts, but also around empathy, something about encouraging people to have a little bit of an understanding. We can't really understand what it was like to be a Jew in Nazi Germany or a Jew in Poland in the 1940s, but trying to understand the impact that it had on individuals, that it's not just the dates, the facts, the countries, the lists. It's also encouraging people to learn more about the individuals who are affected, and then to extend their empathy towards other people today. So as well as encouraging people to learn the facts and share those facts and that knowledge with other people, is also about trying to extend people's empathy and understanding towards other people today, particularly people who might be different from us, whether it's a different faith, a different community, a different age, trying to extend people's empathy. And the third part of what we're trying to do is to encourage action. So when people have the knowledge, when they've extended their empathy, then it's about encouraging people to take action, because none of these things are inevitable.
And how can people get involved? People watching just now, what's the best way for them to get involved in the work that you're doing?
Well, you could log on to our website and sign up for our e-newsletter, and then you can come and join our online event in probably early April, when we'll be launching the theme for next year. I'd really encourage everybody to think of your own networks and who could you be encouraging to mark HMD. You know, do you have children or grandchildren who go to university, and could their, whatever society they're in, doesn't have to be a JSOC. You know, we've got amazing examples of LGBT plus Q plus societies joining with the Disability Society to mark HMD. If you use a library regularly, could you encourage your library to put on a special display for Holocaust Memorial Day, or to do an event, a special event for HMD? Do you go to a bookshop regularly? Could you encourage them to? Do you have a connection with a university and get their history department to put on an HMD lecture? Do you do interfaith events? Are you a member of CCJ, Council of Christians and Jews? Could you support their HMD event?
And one other thing, I know we're now just into March. You've just had January, Holocaust Memorial Day, and that all has to start all over again for next year. And one of the things that you mentioned to me the other week was one of the biggest challenges is thinking up the theme for the next week. Now, I don't want you to necessarily reveal it, but have you thought of the theme for next year?
We have, and we're just in the process of finalising the paper that will support the theme. So I can't reveal anything until we've finished that and we've launched. So we'll launch it with an event. It's one of our biggest challenges because our themes have to be relevant to the Holocaust, but also relevant to genocides in Cambodia and Rwanda and Bosnia and Darfur. They have to be relevant for a prison to feel inspired by it, as well as local councils who do a civic ceremony. So it is challenging, but it is one of the fun things for us to be engaged with. For those of you who aren't aware, the theme for Holocaust Memorial Day this year in January was ordinary people. So our themes every year just encourage people to learn something different, or to get different insights into this history, or to think about things in a different way. So ordinary people, we were encouraging people to really reflect on how everyone's born ordinary. You know, we've talked a lot about celebrities and King Charles. Everyone's born ordinary, but some people become perpetrators. You know, they're not born as evil monsters. And some people become victims. You know, they're not born criminals. They're ordinary people, ordinary Germans, ordinary Latvians, ordinary Ukrainians, who are then turned into victims. And it's ordinary, you know, ordinary rescuers weren't saints or heroes. You know, we all have that potential within us to turn a blind eye and to go for an easy life and to let something go past that. You know, genocide builds up so insidiously. You know, you let things go by because they don't seem that bad, and then something slightly worse happens. We all have that potential to say, hold on a minute, not in my name. So yeah, so our theme helps people look at things differently. We had a theme a few years ago that was quite simply journeys, and people were thinking, oh, okay, yeah, who was driving those trains? Who was laying the tracks? Who was taking people to a killing field? So coming up with a theme, it feels quite a responsibility because it has a very big impact, and it helps, you know, if we get it right, it really helps people engage and learn something new about the past. I like to think we've got a good track record.
Well, we look forward to hearing what next year's theme will be for Holocaust Memorial Day. And thanks very much to you, Olivia, for taking part in this event. And thank you to our Zoom audience as well, and anyone watching on YouTube. If you would like to know more about the Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre and its events, please go to www.jcc.scot. That's www.jcc.scot. Thank you very much. Bye for now.